morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on ESG disclosure. I've gone on record as saying I believe ESG regulation will have a greater impact than MiFID II because it's going to affect the way everything is done, from how listed companies behave to fund managers' investment decisions and advisors' relationships with their clients. But what does it all really mean? My colleague Steve Mitchell and I will share this session, as I'll start by speaking about what the regulations require fund groups and advisors to report and where and when, and Steve will then go into detail about how to compare ESG products, what advisors are doing, and how we can help. During the session, you should learn what the regulations require of you in the UK and in the EU, whether you can be caught by the EU regulations even if you're based in the UK, different ESG solutions, and what different research tools there are. So, starting with the what, there are several things that need to be taken into account before you can work out what needs to be reported and when you need to start doing so. Among the many variables that determine the reporting requirements are whether you're a product provider, or what the European regulation calls a financial market participant, or a distributor or financial advisor. By the way, most European regulations these days use the term distributor as the default, but the sustainable investment regulations are more accurate and refer to financial advisors as what they really are. The category of financial market participant also includes discretionary portfolio managers, so depending on the context, they could fall into both camps. Whether you operate in the UK or the EU, and in the EU, there are also some differences at national level, with the likes of Germany and France operating at a stricter level, or at least with stricter definitions of what funds need to do to be classed as sustainable, compared to others such as Luxembourg, Ireland, or Belgium, for example, which take a more pragmatic approach. Whether you're reporting at a company or product level, this obviously relates primarily to financial market participants rather than financial advisors. And unfortunately, you don't get to choose which level you report on. It's just that there are different reporting rules for each, so product providers need to be aware of both. And whether the product or fund is marketed as a sustainable investment fund, known in the EU regulation as an Article 8 fund, which officially includes funds promoting environmental or social characteristics, while also investing in companies with good governance policies, or it has sustainable investment as its objective, that's an Article 9 fund, or is neither, in which case it falls under Article 6. Because the rules are already laid down there, I'm going to start with a summary of what needs to be reported in Europe. But bear with me, even if you think this doesn't affect you, because it'll be relevant for anyone working for groups that have a European presence or distribute products into the EU. Any UK-based group providing services to EU-based entities, such as delegated portfolio management or distributing UK AIFs into Europe, will be caught up in the rules and will need to report under the EU regulations. There are two EU regulations driving the reporting regime. Firstly, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, or SFDR, which, as the name suggests, sets out the sustainability-related disclosures for financial firms and products, and the Taxonomy Regulation, which stipulates what exactly can be classed as an environmentally sustainable economic activity. Starting here with the SFDR, the reporting requirements came into effect last month on the 10th of March. But when the Level 2 rules were published last summer, the European Commission decided there wasn't enough time to implement them by the 10th of March, so put them on hold, while understandably not wanting to delay the overall implementation date for political reasons, if nothing else. The result was that the overarching principles in the Level 1 regulation have been implemented as planned, but the updated draft regulatory technical standards, or RTS, which put the flesh on the bones of the regulations and provide the details of exactly how the disclosures are to be made and what templates to be used, which was then published again just a couple months ago in February, but won't take effect until the 1st of January next year, subject, of course, to the usual endorsement by the European Commission. Under the Taxonomy Regulation, there will eventually be 6 environmental objectives that determine what is classed as a sustainable economic activity. In addition to targeting one or more of the 6 objectives, any fund will need to ensure it does not significantly harm any of the others. So effectively, funds will need to be mindful of all 6 objectives. If you're not confused yet, don't worry, you soon will be. It does get worse. As things currently stand, the 2 regulations aren't completely aligned, but don't worry too much about that, as they're making efforts to come closer together. In fact, one irony is that when it comes to the Level 2 regulations, the current consultation paper on the Taxonomy RTS talks about the benefits of having just a single set of rules for both regulations. To try to promote this, the Taxonomy RTS have made a number of changes to the reporting templates previously proposed in the SFDR RTS, so as to integrate them rather than set up a second set of templates, which you could probably say is at least a positive. So let's now look at what needs to be reported by each category of firm and/or product. Financial market participants, remember that's asset managers and other product providers, must have a statement on their website, and there is a lot of information that needs to be included in that. This statement needs to give a description of the principal adverse sustainability impacts and what actions they're taking in relation to them, their policies to identify and prioritize the principal adverse impacts, their shareholder engagement policy, and how they integrate sustainability risks in their remuneration policy, adherence to any international standards, sorry, that's not internal standards, that's my fault on the slide, on due diligence and reporting, and the degree of alignment with the Paris Agreement on climate change. Firms with fewer than 500 employees can choose to opt out of considering adverse impacts, but if so, they must say why and whether they plan to take them into account at some date in the future. For each fund, a statement must be included in the prospectus to say if it promotes environmental or social characteristics, don't forget an Article 8 fund, or has sustainability as its objective, such as an impact fund, that's Article 9, or if neither of these, how sustainability risks are incorporated in the management process and an assessment of what impact those risks could have on returns. And if it doesn't incorporate sustainability risks, it must say why not. There are a number of further complications if an index is used as a benchmark for sustainable funds, as it needs to be made clear how the index is aligned with the characteristics or objective and how that index differs from a standard non-sustainable one. Conversely, if no index is used to benchmark an Article 9 fund, you need to explain how you can measure achievement of the sustainable objective of the fund without one. So there isn't really much of an escape here. As I've said, advisors don't report anything at a product level, as they aren't responsible for the management of any products, but they do also need to post a statement on their website saying how they incorporate sustainability risks in their advice process, or if not, why not. They must also include an assessment of the likely impact of incorporating sustainability risks on the possible investment returns, i.e. whether they believe there could be any trade-off between sustainability and financial returns. From the start of next year, product manufacturers will need to use the templates included in the RTS for the SFDR and the taxonomy regulation to report how the environmental or social objectives of their Article 8 or 9 funds will be met. And advisors will also be required to disclose what data from manufacturers they take into account and how, with one challenge being that they'll need to go to the fund prospectus to find the statement, and even the regulators know nobody reads the fund prospectus. Also starting next year, the need for post-sale periodic reporting will start, with funds' annual reports required to include how they're doing in respect of achieving their environmental or social objectives, with future reports building up a back history of up to 10 years, showing how they're progressing, or not as the case may be. I have put a caveat in here saying it might be 2023 before the periodic reports will be needed, as the European regulators have recommended that if the RTS are not endorsed before the end of June, the European Commission should set a start date of 2023 for reports covering the period starting January 2022, as they accept that anything less than 6 months is not enough time to prepare. The first periodic reports will also be due in 2023 for the 4 environmental objectives shown on the previous slide as not coming into effect until the start of that year. A large part of the advisor community in the UK had already started making good progress towards compliance with the SFDR by preparing statements to post on their websites and asking their clients whether and to what extent they want to include ESG considerations in their investments, before it was confirmed last October that the UK would not be adopting any parts of the EU sustainability regulation, because none of it was due to come into effect until after the end of the Brexit transition period, so it wasn't automatically transposed into UK law. But I think little, if any, of that work is likely to have been wasted, as fund sales over the last year show that investors' attention has undoubtedly shifted towards including sustainable investments in their portfolios. So they'll be looking to their advisors to guide them through the maze. And after I've finished, Steve will help guide you through that maze too. And it's not as if the UK is abandoning its plans to require companies to report their progress towards a sustainable future. Last November, the Treasury published its roadmap towards mandatory disclosures aligned with the objectives of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, the international body set up by the Financial Stability Board, with a remit focused on climate change, as its name suggests. As you can hopefully see from the roadmap set out here, the scope is far wider than just the financial services industry. With all premium listed companies, banks, building societies, insurance companies, occupational pension schemes, asset managers, and pension providers required to start reporting at some point over the next 5 years. There are two important points to make here. First, it only concerns the E of ESG because it's about climate-related disclosure. And second, this is about listed companies and asset managers or asset owners reporting their climate-related risks and opportunities, with no mention of requiring advisors to do any reporting, or not yet anyway. In respect of UK asset managers, the FCA is expected to consult shortly on the details of the disclosures that are due to come in over the next couple of years, and they expect 75% of assets to be in scope in 2022, rising to 96% in 2023. So, before I hand over to Steve, I'll just summarise the key dates for the important disclosures and different types of firms. Inevitably, the focus here is on the EU's regulations as they're up and running, but you'll see I've also set out what's happening in the UK as well. Firms with any involvement in the EU, whether managing EU-based funds or selling to EU-based clients, should have started making their pre-contractual disclosures from last month under the SFDR, and website disclosures at an entity level and fund level disclosures in the prospectus. At a product level, disclosures should have started on whether a fund is classified as Article 8, that's light green, Article 9, dark green, or Article 6, not specifically any shade of green. If it's an Article 6 fund, that disclosure includes how sustainability risks are taken into account in the management, or if not, why not? From next January, fund providers will need to start using the templates that are awaiting endorsement by the European Commission under the SFDR, with the amendments currently being consulted on under the taxonomy regulation. So the lead time for this may not be very long in the end, once the final versions have finally been agreed and endorsed. And from next year, Article 8 and 9 funds will need to start including in their annual reports the extent to which their environmental or social objectives have been met, or what sustainable impact the fund has had. For advisors, the obligations for those doing any business in the EU have already started, with a statement required on their website since the 10th of March. But for those who have no dealings outside the UK, it's very much a case of wait and see, with alignment of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure being the driver, subject to industry consultation from the FCA, expected shortly. And on that note, I'll pass over to Steve to give his insights into the challenges of making sense of ESG ratings and how to produce meaningful ESG reports.
Thanks, Mick, and thanks for the overview of the regulatory landscape. I'm Steve Mitchell, Head of Proposition at FE Fundinfo, and today I'm going to take you through comparisons of ESG investments. That'll cover the challenges today, some of the research that we've done with advisors to see what they're doing currently, and also how we plan to help in the future. In terms of the current challenges, the first one really is around availability of data. So historically, there hasn't been a huge amount of standardization or taxonomy around ESG data, something that is improving over 2021, but something that first time really in my career where the demand has outstripped the regulatory definition of data provision. That's really caused the creation of a wide range of ratings and eco-labels available within the marketplace. We've got a few slides later on that to drill into that a little bit more. Another challenge is around the availability of full portfolio holdings. So typically, full portfolio holdings are the underpinnings of any quant or qual research mechanism, and typically they contain quite large embargo periods. So fund managers will provide that data to the industry, but typically with a 90 to 120-day embargo period. As Mick's touched on, we are seeing some standardization effects. So from EU taxonomy, from EMT version 3.1, which includes Article 6, Article 8, and Article 9 definitions, and also benchmarking regulation. Throughout 2021 and beyond, we see an increasing need for comprehensive and accurate data provision from both the underlying companies and the product providers. We see some challenges around passive funds and trackers, so those holding negative stocks. So if you take the example of the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, it contains BAT, it contains Caterpillar and a range of other stocks that typically wouldn't formulate into under that name umbrella, shall we say. One of the main challenges that we see currently over the coming months and years is really matching those ESG outputs to the client preferences. So where one client may be happy to include Heathrow in their portfolio because of its commitment to being carbon neutral by 2050, other clients may just say that airfare and air travel is something they don't want to invest in, so it's a red line. Broadly, we see the evolution of the investment industry over the next 3 to 5 years so that all funds will reflect ESG criteria. Moving on to a survey that we completed just towards the back end of last year. Firstly, we asked advisors whether or not they incorporate ESG factors into their investment proposition. About 2/3 said yes, a quarter said no, but considering doing so, and 8% said no and do not plan to. I think probably if we reran that survey today or in 6 months' time, even that 8% would probably decrease further. Then we moved on to due diligence and asking advisors how do they currently undertake that due diligence in terms of reviewing an investment's ESG credentials. And as you can see from the slide, quite a broad range of outputs. So about half of advisors are reviewing fund documents and fact sheets. And actually, since SFDR went live on the 10th of March, we've seen an increasing number of fund managers providing ESG reports and ESG fact sheets into FE Fundinfo that we will then render into our software. An interesting number really across the 29%, so reviewing fund holdings at a base level, and you can see actually further down 0.4 and 4.5, looking at actually analysing the underlying holdings. So really getting sort of advisors rolling their sleeves up and really drilling into portfolios to understand what they're holding. As you can see towards the bottom, we see actually quite a large dispersion of different ratings agencies or sources, as well as filter tools, so FE Analytics. So FE Analytics historically has always had ethical and sustainable flags available to filter by, but increasingly we expect that the provision of data and documents will allow us, and other research tools, to provide a much clearer view on that. And finally from the survey, we asked around what's the main source of getting that ESG credential data. And as you can see from the bottom answer, typically advisors are using multiple third-party sources. And this was a key part of our research, and we'll talk through that a little bit more. Again, 29% going directly to the fund group. And again, that creates quite a lot of legwork and something that we hope to improve in the future. So looking just more generally at ESG ratings, from our research throughout 2019, 2020, and this year, we really noticed there's a very large number of established providers and new entrants in the market. We identified there isn't really much uniformity in what they're rating or how they're rating it. And they all have different methodologies. So some are more quant-driven, some are qual, some are a bit of both. But in particular, we noticed that they're all assessing very different things. So some are looking at climate, some are focused on carbon intensity and impact, and then you've got the E, S, and the G. It's a bit of a cliche, but one example that's commonly cited is Tesla. So if you take 3 of the main rating providers, one will have Tesla at the top of the pile due to the effects of electronic cars. One will have them in the middle of the pile, and one will have them at the bottom due to lithium battery production. So what we did, we expanded that out to actually analyze sectors and larger ranges of funds across any 2 of the major providers. And we found the average correlation between those 2 providers was 0.16, which is really no correlation at all. And that gave rise to sort of then how do we solve that problem? Through speaking to the advisor community, we came to the conclusion that similar to fund ratings, advisor firms may want to combine different sources of ratings, quant and qual, forward-looking, backward-looking, to provide an overall view of that investment. Moving on to how we're planning to help advisors in the future. So firstly, you may have seen that we acquired a company called CSSP based in Liechtenstein at the start of this year. So Ollie and Christoph pictured there. CSSP, so they set up CSSP 15 years ago. And then they when it first started, they described it as quite a philanthropic business. 5 years ago, it was probably described as niche. And now they would say it's probably more compliant. So you can see the evolution of ESG. Ollie and Christoph, aside from consultancy and lecturing, internationally have built a business that really understands and drills through combining those different metrics around ESG and produce something called a diamond rating. So that fits quite nicely with the crown rating. But in line with the previous research, we also realized we didn't want to just offer our own rating in a crowded marketplace. We found that it was important to provide partnerships with other providers that are widely used. So we've agreed a strategic partnership with MSCI. So MSCI content, whether that's documents, the rating itself, or the underlying field, will be available within our research tools, particularly FE Analytics, whether that's in fund filter tools, within the investment planner journey, within portfolio scanning and client reports. So that's something that's currently being built and will be launched over the summer. Climetrics, their focus is very much on climate, so we get LEAF rating, and also offering ISS ESG. So by offering a range of different providers, we feel that they'll give a really holistic view. And again, looking at the sort of fund rating world, where you have crown rating, you may use a square mile for qualitative rating, Rayner Spencer Mill, there's a lot of different ones out there. And we found that in the platform research a couple of years ago, that most advisors are using 2 or 3 combined to get that view together. Just to give you a visual in terms of the level of information from our market testing that we'll be offering within our research tools. This is a visual. Again, it's a design. It's being built currently. But these are the key factors that we see that advisors need and clients want to hear about. So firstly, the peer and global rank and the distribution of the underlying stocks in terms of the fund holdings of laggards to leaders. Then some measure on carbon intensity and green and brown revenue. Drilling into the G of ESG, so governance around board independence and diversity. And then some of the safeguarding measures around violations, controversial weapons and tobacco. So to summarize the learning objectives, so a recap on what Mick and I have gone through. So firstly, what the regulations require you to disclose, how and where you need to disclose and by when, whether or not you need to consider EU regulations, even if you're based in the UK, the challenge of comparing ESG solutions, and how the use of research tools will evolve over time. Thank you very much.